Hi there, this is Jen Anderson from the Study and Learning Centre. As you may know, the review of literature is the foundation of your research and is likely to be an activity you engage in through the 3 milestones of your candidacy. This is because you need to demonstrate that you're up to date with relevant research and that you're engaged in an ongoing conversation with that literature. This workshop will offer useful advice about structuring your literature review. You might also like to view 2 other videos in the series, Writing as Identity Work and Literature Review Style. For disciplines relevant examples, check out one of the 3 other interactive videos. Library website tutorials such as iSearch, which give advice on locating the literature, are also excellent resources. In this workshop, we're going to discuss how to develop a structure for your literature review according to a conceptual framework that connects your research intentions with existing relevant research. First, we'll think about creating a research story, and then we'll focus on the structural elements of the introduction, body, and conclusion, with particular attention to the conceptual framework applied to the body. What does a literature review do? Well, it's the bedrock of your research. The review tells a clear story with a persuasive twist. It offers a perspective on the existing literature and shows how your research will add to, improve, or challenge prior research. That is, the literature review identifies the original contribution you intend to make to the existing field of knowledge. It justifies your research and your candidature as a graduate researcher. And this is why it's important to write a strong, formative literature review in your research proposal and a powerful, comprehensive, and up-to-date literature review in your thesis or dissertation. This diagram shows how the literature review fits into your research story. It's closely related to your research questions. In fact, it's common for the research questions to emerge from a review of what is already known in the field. The literature review may also be very closely related to the methods you choose to conduct your research, whether you choose to replicate the methods of others or modify them or introduce entirely new methods in response to limitations that you've identified in previous research. And the literature review is also relevant when you come to discuss the implications of your findings. It's an opportunity to explore how and why your findings confirm or differ from findings in existing research. So, the literature provides a knowledge base upon which our research builds. It's central to the research proposal or thesis because it determines your research questions, gives a rationale for your research, justifies your methodology and methods, and is used to compare and contrast your research findings in the discussion section. From this description, we get the idea that reviewing literature can occur in more than one chapter, and it might not even have its own chapter, but be addressed in chapters organised according to themes or some other framework. Now we're going to focus on the structure of the literature review section. The introduction sets the focus for the review of your particular topic through the lens of an issue or question or problem connected to your research questions. The body of the review identifies how major ideas have been developed and or applied, areas of agreement or conflict, and methodological developments and issues. As the review proceeds, general ideas are followed up by those closely connected to your current research. Towards the end of the body, we expect to find a comment on the originality of the current work, usually by noting an absence or gap in information, knowledge, or method. There'll be one or more statements about the contribution the research intends to make to knowledge and perhaps to industry or the community. The conclusion is a summary of the key moves in the review that lead to the importance of this research and a restatement of research aims and questions. What types of literature are you reading? I put reading in quotation marks here because Its meaning is not confined to reading words on a computer or a page. If reading means analysis and interpretation, then we can read music, film, image, object, or any other material that gives context and relevance to our research. What kind of reading is most relevant to your study? Make a list and also include theories, issues, themes, or approaches that you've been reading about or considering. Do you have an idea yet what your original contribution will be? Pause the video now while you brainstorm these questions. And if you're pleased with your brainstorm, why don't you share it with your research mates or your supervisors? In this activity 2, you'll identify the key structural elements in a thesis introduction to a literature review. The introduction example is about tertiary education degrees. Look out for the key elements of general context, research area, gaps in understanding, the focus of the literature review, and the scope of the literature review. Pause the video to read these elements and note them down if you like. Then restart the video to read the thesis introduction sample. Or to make it more simple, why don't you download the PDF Activity 2 file that sits next to this video. Now read the introduction and identify the structural elements. Pause the video now and restart to get the answer. This is a neat example of an introduction suited to a long single chapter literature review. In effect, it's an overview of the literature review. It points to the key issues and arguments and identifies the gap in the research. The first two sentences, A, set the scene or general context. And the next, B, focuses on the research topic from a specific perspective. We see that systemic changes and their impacts on institutions and people have resulted in gaps in knowledge. And the language used to point to these gaps, C, are, we need to fully understand, and there is a need to identify. Next comes a summary of the chapter contents, D, with a reminder that the research focus is on higher degree by research awards, HDR awards. Finally, in E, we learn that the scope of the research is limited to Australian HDR programs with comparisons made with other countries where relevant. Pause the video now to read more closely. When you start collecting literature and making notes, you may have masses of underlined or highlighted text, random thoughts on sticky notes, maybe even a few paragraphs that summarize someone's research. How can you turn that mess into a logically constructed review that increasingly sheds light on our research? If you've been using a synthesis matrix or mind map to summarize the literature, you'll have identified that the literature of interest to your research can be logically categorized into these discrete groups. For example, you may uncover recurring themes that have been analysed and interpreted according to particular theoretical frameworks. Or you notice that relevant literature is organised according to methodologies and methods, and that this is important for your own research. Other categories of organisation include theories, discrete topics, or perhaps a chronology of events. The literature you read in association with your research question helps you decide these structural frames for the body of your own research. A parallel consideration. is the conceptual structure of your literature review, usually written as a movement from general concepts to research-specific concepts. It might be obvious to say that less space is allotted to the general and more to the details of research and knowledge most relevant to your thesis or dissertation. However, the broader conceptual frame is still essential to understanding where and how you are situating your research. We're going to look at some contents pages for literature review sections of theses now, and we should be able to note the structural focus and the conceptual movement in each literature review. Note that the principles of organisation for a literature review are the same for a research proposal and a thesis or dissertation. This is a theme-based literature review, but more than that, it's a clear development from general concept knowledge to the specific focus of information and communication technologies, or ICT, in knowledge management and issues of efficacy. The title tells us that the intention of the research, that is, the key claim is that effective ICT and knowledge management should facilitate, not just enable. This is based on knowledge management theory and practice, explained in 2.3. The research is likely to look at ways in which this can happen. Pause if you'd like to look at this more closely for longer. In this literature review, two forecasting models are reviewed. We expect that in the process of reviewing them, the candidate is identifying strengths and weaknesses of the models. These models can be categorised as topics, but are more like methodologies relating to forecasting. A summary will confirm the argument developed about these models and their relationship to the current study. This literature review is divided into an analysis of qualitative and quantitative research on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children and the interventions used. It's likely that the different methodologies have had an interesting impact on findings or on what is privileged as important. This analysis will be revealed in 2.4, the meta-analysis. Here's a literature review that moves from a chapter outlining theoretical perspectives on the general topic of income support to a chapter on one particular form of income support, work for the dole. It's an interesting review that makes a link between theories guiding policy and community perceptions. It moves from the abstract to the applied, which is the focus of the research according to the title, Work for the Dole Participant Views about Mutual Obligation. This literature review reveals a clear chronological structure, giving a historical account of Australian building regulation over time. If we look at the page numbers, we see that there is significant detail in 2.3 compared to the other sections. We might imagine that 2.5 could be the longest section, because it should be most relevant to the current research if we follow the principle of moving from general to more specific. The progression from constitutional context to general concepts to the historical development of English law, followed by its historical development in Australia, is a good example of this conceptual movement from general to specific. We can also see this mirrored in the title. Pause if you'd like to kind of think about this a bit longer. Now let's look at a conclusion to the literature review. The conclusion fulfills 4 clear tasks. It summarises the major contributions and key concepts. It points out any inconsistencies or gaps in the literature. It shows how the research will address these inconsistencies or gaps posed as a research question or problem, and it introduces the reader to what will happen in the next chapter. You're about to read a conclusion to a literature review and identify its structural features. This review is on the topic of online information retrieval. You'll look for the major contributions of significant research, the gaps in the literature, and how these gaps will be filled by the current study. Also have a think about the linking words used by the writer to guide the reader's comprehension. You can pause the video and make a note of these tasks before you continue, or you can download PDF Activity 3. Just follow the links next to this video. Now read this conclusion or summary section of a literature review on information retrieval. Pause the video. This is a clearly structured conclusion. It outlines advances in the field, which in turn create a new need, the general gap. It identifies 3 specific issues that must be addressed in order to meet this need, made clear by the language "have not considered." And it explains how the research will do this in the following chapters. Notice the signal words in black that indicate the direction of the research story. Can you use these to good effect in your own writing? Pause the video and read just to notice how well constructed this summary is. We hope this video on structuring your literature review has been useful. In Rowena Murray's book on how to write a thesis, she emphasises that PhD writers use the literature review in order to introduce their own research. Don't forget, it's your story. How will you synthesise the work of others with your research? This is the creative challenge. I think the conclusion to the literature review on information retrieval that we've just explored demonstrates this process very effectively. Don't forget to read other theses and dissertations in the RMIT University Research Repository and online databases, and pay particular attention to the ways in which the literature reviews are structured. Plunder them for ideas. Now check out the other video presentations on writing a literature review. Cheers.